take your seats. Please take your seats. We're going to get started. All right. Greg has the enviable task of right after lunch, so we put the right person in that spot. Does anyone can get our attention? Greg can. He is the Harold T. Martin Professor of Marketing at Kellogg School at Northwestern. He knows everything branding, whether it's differentiation, pioneering brands, and today he's going to focus particularly on luxury brands. So without further ado, please, Greg.
Thank you. So yeah, talking about the topic, first I should say this is a joint work with Matthias Mackin, right here. He's a doctoral student at Kellogg's. Near the end of the program. He's working on his dissertation right now. And this is work that focuses on a question that I have been intrigued by for a long time, and which is, I think, a central question in marketing, which is how do brands create enduring competitive advantage? Every brand that's successful invites imitation, and we think that, the very common phrase that all good things come to an end. And sooner or later, that success will be eclipsed by some competitor or some brand that imitates you. Sometimes that can be short, sometimes it can be very long. If you look at the history of some of these brands, it's interesting to see the high variation in that. If you look, for example, at Oreo, Oreo is the copycat to a brand called Hydrox. Some of you may have seen Hydrox cookies. Within 4 years after Hydrox entered, Oreo entered and eclipsed Hydrox and has been in the lead for 100 years since. So sometimes success is short. In the case of General Motors, they were the largest and most valuable company in the world for 20 consecutive years, which was pretty amazing and still, I think, stands as a record. But that too comes to an end. But what I discovered Nathan mentioned this luxury, but I started teaching a class in luxury, and I discovered in luxury there's some brands that are remarkably enduring, that succeed for years, decades, and sometimes centuries. And so the question is, what makes this tick? And so some of these brands, we call them legendary brands. They defy imitation, and they outsell their competitors, sometimes they say for centuries. And so the question is we're going to look at it is really why. So this two pictures on the screen I'll share with you, two examples that will motivate our discussion. That's too bad. It's not quite 5 o'clock, but we should think about it. Less than wine, possibly. So the brand on the right, or the violin on the right, is a violin made by Antonio Stradivari. Antonio Stradivari and his colleague Giuseppe Guarneri made violins in late 1700s and early 1800s in northern Italy. And they are considered then the finest string instruments ever produced, and they remain that way. They remain having that reputation. And they sell for spectacular sums, I'll show you in a moment. The bottle of wines on the left are made in Burgundy in France. Some of you, if you're a wine fan, will know this. A producer called Domaine de Romanée-Conti. They've been making wine in this particular spot in Burgundy since 1282. Monks who lived there originally, or produced the wine originally, produced it, of course, for religious purposes. And now it's one of the greatest and most coveted wines on the planet. The one review I read about Romanée-Conti described it as the finest wine available to humanity, full stop. That was the review. And they've been doing this for 700 years. So the question is, what can explain this, or what can we learn from this? So the explanations have really focused on product features. Artem talked a little bit about, my colleague Artem, about identifying product features, and that's an extremely important part of marketing and strategy. And my reporter years ago, talking about strategy, wrote about firms create this superior product by differentiating using this unique and valuable attribute. The work I did that Nathan mentioned on pioneering looked at how some pioneering brands succeed for such a long period of time. I was interested in that question. We looked at brands like Levi's and Uber and so forth, and how can they succeed? And we understood that through the process through which you and I learn our tastes. But the legendary brand, the work on this has also focused on this concept of identifying unique product features. And in the case of the violins, provide a great example, I think. The wine, the Romanée-Conti, they believe they have the understanding, which is the vineyard that grows it. But for the violins, it's still a little bit up in the air, but it's produced a whole literature of people trying to identify what the secret of these Stradivari violins are. And they look for this success in the product itself, in the product features. So here's a quotation taken from a paper that appeared in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. And the chemists and the material scientists are analyzing the properties of the wood. And I won't read the whole thing to you. What they did is plasma mass spectrometric analysis, and to look at the chemicals that Stradivari treated the wood with. And their conclusion was that he treated it with a special mix of, let's see if I've got it right here, unusual mix aluminum, calcium, copper, sodium, potassium, and zinc that was unknown to violin makers at the time. And this is, they believe now, or there's some sense that this is the source of this extraordinary sound that Stradivari's make. And they've been, despite this scientific work, there's been, for centuries, people have tried to copy it. Luthiers are, but people who make violins, of course, and the New York Times wrote about this, and said luthiers have tirelessly tried to imitate Stradivari and Guarneri's craftsmanship, copying their wood choice, geometry, and construction methods, but their efforts have met with little success. Why no one has been able to replicate that sound remains one of the most enduring mysteries of instrument building. So for 200 and plus years, we've been trying to copy it. The people who've acquired the tools Stradivari used, they know the woods where he cut down the trees, and they failed even so. So the question is, what has contributed to this? And the success, the prices associated with these seem to just be going up. So $10 million was not uncommon, including this inflation, but $20 million seems to be the new price for Stradivari. And of course, there's about 650 left. They seem to all be surviving, but we don't know for how long. So the question we look at in this work, which we're not done with, we're a good part of the way through, is what creates this enduring advantage, and what can we learn from this? Is there anything we can learn for consumer packaged goods and other brands that help us understand how to create such an enduring advantage? And that's what we're going to talk about. So the basic, we begin with this idea of looking at this world, how we look at products. And the conventional way to look at products is based on product decomposable into product features. We look at an iPhone, for example, and we understand that we can decompose it into there's, the size of the screen, the amount of memory, the brand name. We can identify the attributes of a phone, and we can value those, so we can compare the iPhone with the Samsung phone, and we can make a choice. And if iPhone should have some unique property that no other phone has, well, it might have an advantage until Samsung can copy that. Now, so the argument is that legendary brands must likewise rest on this unique feature, and that's what all the chemists are trying to find in these violins. But there's a very interesting idea that I've been identified in this work in luxury I've done about looking at the world in a different way about products. And the concept that's been introduced by a French sociologist named Lucien Carpic is that some things, products are what he calls singularities. And a singularity is a multi-attribute product, but what makes it different is the attributes structure is so complicated, you and I cannot separate the attributes into individual attributes that we're able to value one apart from the other. So you can think of this Picasso painting. We could identify attributes of this Picasso painting, but can we really value the individual components of this painting? And the answer is probably not. Or of university education, we can see that it's a Northwestern University, it's Chicago, it has certain features, size, departments, degrees, but can you really understand how to value those separately from one another? And there's these other pictures show different examples of other singular products or services. By the way, human ones are very important about this. Medical services, or you can know where your doctor went to medical school and went to college and where he or she were trained. Can you really separate that to identify what makes she or him an effective surgeon? It's hard to understand that process. So for these singular products, we have a hard time evaluating them. And we rely on things like rankings and experts and so forth, because it's an admission that we can't value them in the same way. And so what Matthias and I argue is that for these legendary brands, that you and I rely on social cues to value them, and that's the basic, extremely important part of how we reach judgments about their value. And that process looks something like this. You start with the social cues. You're at dinner and someone springs for a bottle of Domaine Romani Conti, which would be a nice bonus, or you get the you get the opportunity to test drive a Ferrari, and that you know something about the status of the Ferrari, and that creates some expectation about what's going to happen when you drive the car or sip the wine or listen to the Stradivarius. So the social cues that Carpenter talks about create some expectation. You try it, you drive the Ferrari, you sip the wine, you listen to the Stradivari, and you have some reaction to that. But because you have these high expectations, what happens? The experiences could be not definitive, not always definitive. You taste a glass of wine, you know how expensive it is, you know how extraordinary it is, you know how to value it, it's very complicated. So there's an opportunity for confirmation bias. So if we have very high expectations, we will very likely have a very good experience. If we have a very good experience and that generates positive emotions, we will evaluate the product very well, and therefore there'll be this sort of confirmation, self-imposed confirmation based on the social norm. We are reacting, status of course is the expectation or the understanding what everyone else in the world believes. So if everyone else believes that Domaine Romani Conti is great, I'm not going to drink it and say this is the worst stuff I've ever had. Even if I don't like it, because I have to differ with the world on that. So this is confirmation bias. Likewise, if it's a low status brand, I'll have low expectations. Low expectations translates into fewer positive thoughts. Fewer positive thoughts turns into less positive experience. Less positive experience, less overall reduced evaluation. This is just to point out, this is different than a conventional experience good, like Michelle was talking about, or like the gentleman raised before, in the sense that in traditional experience good, the experience is informative. You buy a car, I ask you 3 years later how you like it, you can give me an opinion based on how much it costs you per mile to operate that car, how comfortable it is to drive. Experience is very informative. In this case, experience is less informative, but it's informative not in the sense of revealing the product quality, it's informative in revealing our emotions about what that experience was like. And those have become very powerful. So we tested this idea with a series of experiments. Does this brand status really affect what consumers expect, their reactions to what they experience, and their overall evaluation of these singular products? And we did in a few categories. I'll just share a couple with you today. The first one was in wine category. We recruited, by the way, this is very difficult to do at university, to get approval to list wines. It took tests. It's the most patient person I've ever met. It took us a year to get approval to have students or people drink 2 ounces of wine. So then we said, we'll skip wine, we'll do coffee, and so it's just as bad. We have to get medical doctors involved in this. Anyhow, so we described 2 brands of wine to the participants. In a counterbalanced order, a high status and a low status brand. They read about the first wine, they rated the status of the brand, their expectations, they tasted the wine, and then they rated their experience, and they did the same for the second brand. The 2 brands of wine that they read about was the high status one is a French brand of champagne called Veuve Clicquot, you might have heard about. Known informally as the Widow, and the lower status brand of wine was one called Girls Gone Wine, which is a winery. I didn't make this up. This is a real winery in my favorite winemaking town, Copycats, Oklahoma. The wine they grow wine. They grow wine in every state in the United States. By the way, they make wine. This wine comes from the hill country in Texas. So I'm eager to try it. Okay, so they read about these 2 wines, and then we asked the status and their expectations. And as you would imagine, they think Veuve Clicquot is a higher status brand, and they have higher expectations. Veuve Clicquot is the lighter gray bars there, and the Girls Gone Wine is the darker. Then we gave them 2 wines. The 2 wines they tasted were both California sparkling wines that cost around $20 and were rated by professional experts to be essentially identical. are equally scored, not identical. They were both rated by this Wine and Spirits magazine where they do blind tasting. And they're both, I think, scored 89 points. So they were essentially, according to these panel of experts, equivalent. And so they tasted the wine, and then the question is, what did they experience after that? And did the status influence their expectations at all? Well, the preference, of course, no matter what you give them, they like it when it's called Veuve Clicquot better than when they think it's Girls Gone Wild. And so it's unambiguous and it's consistent. And so it's a simple effect, but it's I think, an interesting effect. And we have a little bit more to talk about this effect, but this is so the point is that our experience is not always informative, and our expectations influence what we see. You know, the psychologist, and we have a phrase in English that says believing seeing is believing. Psychologists have a phrase that says believing is seeing. And so if you believe it's going to be good, it's more likely to be good. And so that's what is reflected here. Now, I can tell you, and I asked about their experience with the two. Same thing, the significant difference across the two, and they much prefer their experience with Veuve Clicquot. Now, I'm just going to skip over this. So brand status affects what we experience. Consumers have higher expectations. They confirm their expectations. But from a competitive strategy point of view, which is where I tend to look at the world, this creates a big disadvantage for new competitors. If you're trying to make a champagne or a sparkling wine to compete with Veuve Clicquot, you can make a product that's just as good, and consumers will consistently taste it and say it's not as good. And so there's this fundamental disadvantage which you have to overcome. And that disadvantage is due to both the ambiguity of the experience, the structure of the product, in fact it's complex and we really can't evaluate it very well, but also that it's singular and that there's this ambiguity and we have certain expectations that are playing a big role in the process. So I talked to a wine critic about this and he says, of course this is true. He says, the wine market is chaos, is what he said. Now what he mean by this is very important, I think. What he meant is that the correspondence between price and quality in an expert's mind is not clear at all. It's a very low correlation because most of us are buying wine. We're not very experienced. We don't understand this, and we're guided by things like brands, which then skew the whole process and mean that wines that they might turn their nose up are popular, and wines that so that it's chaos. Now, I'm going to argue it's actually not really chaos. It's just operating according to a very different logic than a traditional market logic. And that was revealed to me when I raised these comments with a winemaker, doing some research in the wine business, and he said, of course this is true because people aren't buying what's in the bottle. That's what he told me. Which is very discouraging if you're a winemaker. You spend your life putting things in bottles, and making things in the bottle, or buying what's in the bottle. That's a painful admission, but I think an insightful comment nonetheless. So we began another experiment. So we just talking about a series of 2 or 3 experiments. Second experiment is, well, what if, with the last experiment, the products were basically equal? And that created this bias. What if, in fact, we picked 2 products that were very different, both at least based on objective characteristics and possibly based on their social reputation? Would the same effect occur if you had, I'll tell you about the experiment in a second, but if you compared a Stradivari with a $69 violin you purchased on Amazon, those we would agree are objectively different, and they also have different reputations. So that's the next experiment we ran. So we created this is a little wordy here, but so we created an experiment with 3x2 experiment, 3 groups of consumers. In one group, they listened to a violin listen to one violin, but they're not told about any brands. They just listen to a recording of one of 2 violins, and there's no brand names. They say, you're going to listen to a violin. We played them, I think it's Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. The same person played both instruments. So the next group of people, we told them they were going to listen to a Yamaha violin. And we played them either the $69 Amazon violin or the $10 million Stradivari. We had a recording of a person playing the exact same song using those 2 instruments. And the third group, we told them they'd be listening to a Stradivari, when in reality they would possibly be listening to a Stradivari or they would be listening to a Yamaha. Then we asked them to listen to this, rate their expectations, rate the status of the brands, rate the experience, and explain. I think the most important thing I can share with you here is their explanation for the experience. So they love of course, they have rate the Stradivarius much higher than the Yamaha. Although, interestingly, I think the Yamaha, we didn't test this, but the Yamaha seemed much more familiar to them since they make lots of other things. They make motorcycles, and they've heard this brand name. A lot of people have actually never heard of Stradivari before. It is, unless you're into classical music, it's a little obscure. And then we asked them about their experience, and of course, regardless of what they're listening to, so the darker gray bars are listening to the $69 violin, and the lighter gray bars are listening to the $10 million violin. 5 minutes. Okay. And there is, of course, no difference between the Amazon or the Stradivari. If they believe it's a Stradivari, there's no difference between the Stradivari and the Amazon if they believe it's a Yamaha. And there's no difference without the brands either. So objectively, they're not giving you any information. Okay, so let me think here. Now we asked them, why'd you give the rating? And this is, I think, is the most important. It's very emotional. They express a lot of emotions. When the violins are unbranded, they say it was irritating. Listening to the Stradivari was irritating. I was a little irritated because of the high pitch of the violin. It wasn't pleasant to listen to alone. When there was a Yamaha, the same people said, I thought it was painful. It sounded like a lesson. Okay? When it was branded Yamaha, they similarly didn't enjoy it. I think the tone, I was thinking that the tone was sharp and unpleasant. That's the Stradivari. And it's an Amazon. It sounded nice, a little squeaky, hurt my ear. If they believe it's a Stradivari and it's a Yamaha, it's an Amazon violin, they said, it made me think of my daughter and the song that I sang to her when I put her to bed every night. It makes me feel warm and happy. And when it's as Stradivari, it says, felt very peaceful, the music was clear and crisp, very nice. So they're having genuinely different reactions to the same stimulus. It's because of this expectation and our confirmations and the emotions we generate simply based on the brand. And so the experience, as you can see, was dramatically different. Okay. Let me think here. I, of course, included too many slides, and that's 2 studies. So, then we just did, for those of you in the room, we said, well, how much of this is due just to status? So you could argue that it's just status, and that's what we like status for lots of reasons as human beings. And so what we're going to do is, so we tested that, and we created a model where we looked at the impact of status on experience, and the impact of status on the positivity of the experience, and the impact of that on the experience, and we found a significant relation. So yes, so status does have a direct effect through on the experience, but also has this indirect effect through positivity. How much time do I have left?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. Okay, so the implications of this are, first of all, that people's tastes are quite volatile. They're volatile based on the experience, of course, based on these judgments and based on these emotions we generate. And without preference, without ability to determine attribute preferences, people rely on these social cues. We rely on status, we rely on what other people say. And I think it's really important in these studies, these are not, I don't think it's any big surprise that we are influenced by social norms. There's lots of famous studies in psychology about this. But in this case, there's no other human beings in the room influencing these people. It's the social norm implied by the brand. The fact that this is something that people admire and they respect and they understand is an expensive and extraordinary instrument. That's enough to influence our judgments. So the stability of these preferences and their reactions generate remarkably stable preferences for these legendary brands. Okay, I'm just going to zoom through the last one in the interest of I'm out of time. Well, I'll just show you actually the last study we did. Okay. So I'll just one little slide here. So we did the same thing with Stradivari and so forth, and I want to read the quotation at the bottom right-hand corner for you. They listened to a Stradivari. They didn't know anything else about it. They believed it was a Stradivari, and the emotion was really overwhelming. I felt nostalgic for a moment. It took me back to being a child and being in the front row at a musical play. These are things people generate. Sometimes we think people who do online experiments are not paying attention. Clearly, they're paying attention. I was mesmerized by the musicians, and I had forgotten the memory until right now. It made me feel calm and soothed. So this is unbelievable. This is from listening to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. However long it takes. Okay, 1 minute left. Okay, so let me just back. So here's the interesting part about this. Is what we see is this kind of process going on. High status brands have this great experience that produces their enduring success, but their enduring success contributes to the status of their brand, and so it's a positive cycle. So I said at the beginning of the talk that good things don't last forever. What's interesting about this, to me, is the following. I'll try this quickly. Is that this research finds a role for status and social influence and the complexity of the product in creating an enduring advantage. Now, in one level, if I were to talk to my colleagues in marketing, they would say, well, we know status is an advantage, and we understand social influence is important, and we understand that complexity can create advantages. But what's surprising to me is it's not that those individually alone create an advantage. What our study shows is that the combination of those three creates a very different process by which we evaluate the product and produces an advantage that not only can endure for 200 years, but can grow and become stronger over time. So I think most brands create an advantage, and what happens? That begins to erode as soon as the competitors challenge them. In this case, not only does it not die quickly, but it grows over time. And so this opens, from my perspective, a new window or a new door to think about competitive advantage and how we can create it, and to look at how these factors interact with one another and combine to create this enduring advantage. So I hope that opening that door is helpful for you. It certainly is, and we will continue to explore it. So thank you very much.
One question?
Okay, yes, please.
Thank you. This is really interesting. I'm wondering, since you mentioned singularities, have you ever considered trying low singularity products to check if it's the similar result? Or
Yes, we have. We've talked about it. We're talking about, in fact, today. So things which are like iPhones or something that people can evaluate the attributes and draw the comparison. We also thought about looking at experts versus novices, whether experts look at the world in a different way or in a more sophisticated way. So part of the research we're doing to complete the work is to figure out sort of what the next few studies are. So I appreciate that.
Do you think it's more like singularities of the brand or the product?
No, the singularities of the product. The singularities of the product, right? And so that's what creates the complex, and that's what people try to copy. They try to copy the violin or whatever it might be. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.